And that's actually kind of where I want to start, was when you're in the advertising world.
Yeah.
So kind of like, can you give me like a brief history of your career in advertising?
Yeah, so I worked for a company called FCB, and then it switched over to Draft FCB, and then became FCB again, I think, after I was already gone. So I don't know what they call themselves these days, but I worked for the same company for many, many years. I ended up, when I was, I went on maternity leave after I got pregnant with my first child, and when I came back, I ended up getting laid off. So it's okay. It ended up really well for me. But so that was kind of a crazy experience, and I'll let you take away from that what you will. But so I've always been a very career-driven person. I never intended to be a stay-at-home mom. That's always like been a very big piece of me. So so I think like the very like next day I like got on a freelance gig and started freelancing. But while that was going on, I kind of recognized that I was going to have a very hard time finding another full-time job. Not just a full-time job, like I was a senior vice president, creative director at this company, which is, you know, that's a good, it was a decent position. And to make, you know, to get to that same place when I had like no digital experience at the time, because back then they kept digital and the general creative department very separate. So it was either, you know, you worked on, what I worked on was commercials and print ads, mostly commercials actually. And that's how I like, you know, sort of propelled my career. So number one, you didn't want to work on the digital stuff because that was not as glamorous. And number two, they wouldn't even if like towards the end while I was there, I think a lot of the general creatives were realizing the direction that everything was heading. So we started asking to get put on the digital assignments, and also to sort of like think about it all more cohesively. But the problem, at least at the agency that I was at, was that it was more expensive for them to put the general creatives on the digital stuff. So like just however like they budget things, I don't know how it all works, they wouldn't let us do it. So we ultimately at that point weren't able to get that experience. So when I was laid off, I realized that this was now an issue, that I was someone who only had experience in traditional media, and it would be hard for me to get a job as a new mom at the level that I was without having, you know, not having that experience with more digital stuff. So I said, I'm going to create my own digital experience. And then the other thing is I worked on a lot of brands at the time that were very mom focused. So we had been hearing from the clients a lot about the mommy bloggers. And I mean, and to them, I think whenever they spoke about them, and again, when they talked about them, I wasn't a mom yet. I didn't have any experience reading mommy blogs. But I think I always, I imagined stay-at-home moms like in the middle of the country, you know, like this is what they're, not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is what they're kind of doing it as like a little side gig or whatever. And so what I thought was if I could create a mom blog, so I recognized it as being important. I didn't know that if it was ultimately a moneymaker. I don't think I was thinking about it that way. I was thinking that it was very relevant to whatever was going on right now in advertising. So I decided I was going to start my own mom blog and get like as much experience as I could in that. And then within that be doing, you know, building a website and creating an online presence and all of that would sort of substitute for my digital experience, let's say. And I really thought what I was doing was creating that to get a better advertising job. I wasn't thinking that it was ever going to like be the thing, you know? And I think what's interesting is I think the more I did it and the more I realized how the relationship that you build with your readers and how like important that is, I started to see that it's like, no, like me recommending something is way more valuable than someone seeing something in a commercial or something like that. Like that's going to not make people act as much, you know? So whenever I would go on interviews, I kept bringing up my mom blog as being an important piece of what made me valuable. And the advertising industry at the time, because this is, you know, 9 years ago, they they weren't there yet, you know? So I would bring this up and they were sort of like bringing me back to like, you know, what they do at their agency. And I remember my headhunter called me and she's like, you have to stop talking about your mom blog in interviews. Like nobody cares. And I'm like, but they don't understand. It's so important. It's so like what's going on right now. And it was a little too early for them to see it, I guess. So I continued on with my mom blog and I kept freelancing. And then I think eventually I started getting freelance jobs based on the fact that I had this mom blog. And there was actually a few instances where clients were requesting me specifically because of that. And then I was working for this agency where they started basically like making me part of their presentation because I was freelancing for them a lot, almost like a permalance job. And it was like I was like their secret weapon. So they would always have me as part of their presentations that like they have this window into this world that's very important for their clients. And then it was sort of like, well, what is my, like, am I doing this all for, you know, for the agencies that I work for, or could I do it for myself, you know? And I think at a certain point we sort of decided, at the time I was freelancing during the day and I was doing the blog at night, and my husband, who has been incredibly supportive throughout this whole thing, he said, what could you do with it if you spent your full time on it, as opposed to it just being like something you did after the kids went to bed? And that was one of the impetuses to sort of like really see if I can make it a full-time job.
That's awesome. So I was really curious, like when you first created the account, where did the name Mommy Shorts come from?
Right. So one of the original thoughts that I had was I had like all these little, because when I worked in advertising, it was always like coming up with like little 30-second stories that we would film. So, and obviously like on much bigger budgets and for brands. So I think like in my beginning parenting phases, I would come up with these little stories that I thought would play out really well on film. And at the time it was like actually shooting that live seemed like a little bit crazy. So I'm like, maybe I'll do like these animated shorts. Which I also found out is very expensive to do animation. So, but I think originally I was thinking that I wanted to do like branded content shorts, you know? So when I said Mommy Shorts, it was supposed to be like short content. So it was like short films, short posts, like, if you go back to like when I first started, a lot of the things that I was posting was like, I don't know if you remember this or if it still exists, but I Can Has Cheeseburger. Do you know what that is?
That sounds familiar.
So that was like I think like one of the first like meme sites, I guess. Like all of that stuff is now like on Instagram or just like posted on social media. But it used to be that there was a site that you would go to and it was just like meme after meme after meme. And in my head was like, I want to create that for specifically parents. So like a lot of my original posts would be like just what I guess you would call now a meme. I wouldn't have called it that at the time. It was just like a picture with a caption.